My husband and I met 16 years ago, and within 2 months of dating, he asked me to consider an open relationship. I heard open relationship and I was angry and embarrassed and cried, created our own definitions of cheating. We defined our own versions of our rules.
There is no the one. That is a myth. That is a monogamous myth handed to our cultural myth.
That might be the third thing I'd want to debunk is that people look at an open relationship as a failure. For every man that was passing on his genetic DNA, there were 17 women. That original code wrote that a woman was a man's property.
The feeling in my body I get when I tell someone that may not know that I'm non-monogamous, that feeling is the exact same feeling I get in my body when I tell someone that I founded and am the CEO of a smut publishing company. It's the same. I
get it.
This is the point. Yeah. They're either going to be like, I shouldn't let my kids play with her kids anymore.
If you're in a monogamous relationship, I think it's the safest way you could cheat because there's no way that reading a book should count as cheating.
Hi, I'm Allison, CEO of Bothered Stories, and this is Smut Talks. Join me for candid conversations with leading voices about smut, desire, the patriarchy, and the cultural forces shaping the stories we love. Let's get bothered.
Welcome to Smut Talks. I am thrilled to have Danielle here today, the founder of Openly Committed. Danielle is a speaker, an expert, a relationship coach, all about non-monogamy. She recently launched a matchmaking service that thoughtfully vets and connects people in the non-monogamous community. So I'm excited to learn more about that. She's a Substack with articles and resources on it, and she shares her own stories and insights on TikTok and Instagram as Openly Committed. I'm really excited to dive into it all. Thank you for being here, Danielle.
Thanks for having me.
I can't wait. Okay, so let's start with getting to know you a little bit more before we dive into all the meaty topics that I want to get into. I want to get into non-monogamy and the patriarchy. I want to get into smut and how smut and non-monogamy overlap.
I love it. So excited.
I know. And if you're listening to this and you're like, where's the overlap? I don't think there's an overlap. Just trust me.
Just definitely an overlap.
Stay with us. Okay. But first, let's just start getting to know you a little bit better. Tell us about Openly Committed and just the work that you do in that space.
Absolutely. So I've been sharing stories and recommendations from my open marriage online for the past 4 years. Interestingly, I've always wanted to write, and I love writing. Writing is very much how I process. And so I said to my husband about 4 years ago, I want to start writing a blog and writing these stories. And he was like, that's nice. It's 2022. Do a TikTok. And so I shared the first couple stories on TikTok about being jealous about my husband's girlfriend at the time, and they kind of blew up. And so overnight I had a small following and but I had a lot of questions and people asking me about, how did I get here, and how did I get over jealousy, and how did we set up our boundaries, and how do we establish our own agreements, and what did we do for communication? And so I just started sharing more and more of those stories online. And 4 years in, I'm still doing so. And now it's definitely evolved to include a Substack, to your point, the matchmaking service, which I'm really excited about. I've become a speaker on the topic of how relationships are changing, as well as the history of relationships. And so I get to bring in all these parts of myself that I really enjoy and just connect to an amazing community. I like to say that I have carved out my absolute favorite corner of the internet of a whole bunch of people who are in different phases and stages of opening up their relationships and are just so wonderful and supportive, not just for me, but also to each other. And so that's where Openly Committed is at today.
Oh, I love that. And this idea of getting to bring your personal life to other people in a way that helps them and then builds community is deeply resonant with me as someone that just launched Bothered Stories. And I'm, now getting really into the smut community. And it feels like all the pieces of myself are kind of coming home. And so I love to hear that in other people as well. Tell us, thank you. Okay. So you mentioned your husband, you mentioned open relationship. You mentioned your husband's girlfriend. These are all just things I heard in your little intro. So tell me a little bit more about your personal non-monogamy journey, because I know that is a big part of the work you do, and you're very open about it, which is helpful to millions of people. So just tell us about that a little bit.
My husband and I met 16 years ago, and within 2 months of dating, he asked me to consider an open relationship. And when he brought it up because he had seen affairs destroy relationships, destroy families, and he wanted to affair-proof our relationship. He approached it from a really romantic way, saying, I want to be with you forever. I want to figure out and create a relationship that is specific for us. And that's not what I heard. I heard open relationship, and I was angry and embarrassed and cried and was, what the? And it took us 2 years because even though I had a really big emotional reaction, I was also curious. And so I did agree to not be in an open relationship right away, but to explore the concept. And so we spent almost 2 years figuring things out, reading books, and there weren't a lot back in 2010. But we met as many people as we could. We went to a swingers club. We had a threesome for the first time. We spoke with as many people as we could find who were already polyamorous or already swinging, and just spent that time figuring out a relationship that worked for us, and created our own definitions of cheating. We defined our own versions of our rules. We really crafted something unique to us, and what we both wanted in order for us to both have our needs met and also to both live our biggest lives. And we've evolved so much in these 16 years. The rules that we wrote down for us 16 years ago are not the same rules that we have today. There are some things that are stricter. There are some things that are more relaxed. And I also like to think that we've gone through so many phases of monogamy, honestly, when I first gave birth to our first son, when we've had phases of polyamory where both my husband and I at different times had very beautiful romantic relationships with other people who were involved in our lives, who, we called boyfriend, girlfriend, who came on vacations with us, who met our kids. We had a phase of swinging when it was all about the physical and not about the emotional with other people. And I think that, thinking of our relationship as something that is constantly evolving is one of the reasons that we're still together 16 years later. And I think in a place where we're confident enough that I can talk about it online.
I love that. I love this quote that says something like, if you're not growing, if you're not evolving, you're dead. Like, what's the point of being alive, right? If you're not evolving and growing. And so, I mean, I think that's really interesting. I also have been in an open relationship with my husband for about a decade, and it's never been the same. There's not a single year where it has looked and felt exactly the same. And that's because we're both growing as people, and the circumstances of our lives are changing. As you mentioned, you're pregnant, you had a child, you guys probably had different jobs, like just things change. And so your lives evolve. So this is a really good segue into what non-monogamy is, because you just mentioned a few different things. You mentioned polyamory, you mentioned swinging. If someone's listening to this and they are unfamiliar with what non-monogamy means, with like how it would even be practiced, what it might look like, could you just give us like a really quick lesson of like, here are the different ways it's practiced, here's how it might look like, here are some of the terms you might have heard?
So I think non-monogamy, specifically either ethical or consensual non-monogamy, are probably the two big words used today to describe it. And it's really an umbrella term. So I think under the umbrella of non-monogamy, you have everything that's not monogamous. And so within that, you have polyamory, which is often defined as as having emotional, romantic, and physical relationships with other partners. Multi-loves is what polyamory stands for. You also have a swinging community, which is much more physical focused and not on long-term connections. And you have a little bit of everything in between. The reason I like the term non-monogamy, or I usually call myself open, is because I love how it sounds. I love being open to new ideas, open to new relationships, open to things changing and seeing how it goes. There's another term that's currently in the limelight, which is relationship anarchy, which at its core is about developing a relationship that is specific for the people in it. And you're hearing that one used quite a lot nowadays as well.
Yeah, I had heard that term used quite a lot too, and it always a little bit felt off-putting to me because the word anarchy, I'm a type A person. I'm organized. I run a business. So anarchy is not in my wheelhouse. I don't do chaos. I want things clear.
Yes.
But what's interesting is I actually went recently and looked up the original Relationship Anarchy Manifesto. It's a document. You guys can Google it. And I was quite surprised to see that it, to me, felt as far from anarchy as one can be. It's all about commitment and the commitments you make. It's about communication. It's about intentionality and developing customized relationships tailored to those two people versus enacting or executing on a script that's been given to you from like broader society.
Yes. I think the challenge that I've seen with relationship anarchy is that it does tend to ignore the social structures that are in place. But quite frankly, I just don't think you can ignore yet. Insurance policies are based on two people and around monogamy. That is changing very slowly. Portland, Oregon, Boston, Massachusetts have just made big changes in this space. From a legal perspective.
Yeah.
There's an incredible organization called Chosen Family Law out of New York that is at the forefront of changing and being involved in these conversations. But at the end of the day, right now, there is still social, cultural, religious stigma, family stigma. There are systems in place. You get a lower mortgage on your car if you're married. There's still only 2 spots for parents on a child's birth certificate. So one of the things that I think is challenging, that I find personally challenging about the term relationship anarchy, is that it's all well and good and sounds so nice and wonderful, but I don't think it reflects the actual reality that most people are still functioning in and are trying to make their relationships work in.
Yes. I hear that. And marriage is such a staunch institution between
Absolutely.
two people in our society. Okay. So this is kind of segueing into a conversation I wanted to have with you regardless, which was debunking monogamous beliefs. So where I want to go with this, or what I want to talk about is there is a set of monogamous beliefs, a core belief system we're all given from childhood on that most of us absorb and just fall into. And that's not wrong or right, but it is a set of core beliefs that may or may not necessarily be true or moral or immoral, right? And so can we just walk through some of those beliefs? Because I think a lot of those beliefs are underpinning the systems and structures that you just spoke to, Danielle.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So I think, and this goes right, this also dovetails into some of the pushback, mistrust, or judgment that non-monogamous people will receive from others when they find out that you're not monogamous. So that's part of the conversation too. Yeah,
what do you think is what's the number one thing that you wish you could debunk about non-monogamy?
Let me see if I can articulate this. And I'm going to start by describing the feeling in my body that I have when I tell someone I'm non-monogamous that is very monogamous and is very heteronormative, and I don't really know how they feel about it. So I have kids. I have little kids. And most of the parents in my little kids' classroom, for example, wouldn't know that my husband and I are non-monogamous because why would they know, right? But as you get to know someone better, at some point, you're going to tell them because it's who you are. It's part of your life. And so I have this feeling in my body every time I tell them, which is just like a clenching of like, how is this going to land? What are they going to think? Our relationship from this point is going to go in one of 2 directions. One direction, they're going to think it's great. They're going to love it. They're not going to care. Maybe they'll be curious, and that'll be that. The other direction is they're going to think, I don't know about that. Maybe my kids shouldn't play with her kids. Like, what does that say about her? What does that say about that family? What does that say about their values? And so there's a moral judgment passed. And I am bracing to find out which way it is. And so I think that's the debunking that, for me, I most wish we could move away from, is the moral judgment about it, about either way. What would you say? What's your answer?
I definitely agree with the moral judgment. And I think it stems at its core from two assumptions. The first assumption being that if you're in an open relationship, that it must be all about sex. And I think that that's like the first one that people jump to that then turns it into a moral argument. And the second one is that you're just cheating on your partner, and I think that that assumption, like, oh, you're just cheating, is another one that I think the first things people jump to before they have that, oh my God, this person is doing something so wrong, so morally wrong and corrupt that I wouldn't want my children around them. So I think I definitely agree with that. Um, I think one of the things that what are some of the other ones that I wish I could debunk? This idea that I had to get over, this idea of that there's one person out there that is going to meet every single one of my needs. Because I think that I grew up in this fairy tale culture, and I also grew up religious. So my fairy tales were telling me that there was a perfect Prince Charming that was out there that was going to whisk me away on a white horse, and we would have our happily ever after. And then I think the second thing that I learned growing up in the church is, that there was one person that like God that was intended for you, that God had intended for you, and that would be your person. And I think that was a really hard one for me to get over, and for me to just sort of recognize that I have found an incredible partner in my life, but that our partnership was built, it wasn't found. It was because I found someone who we were able to work through the communication. We were able to work through the things of our relationship that make it so wonderful. And yeah, it wasn't something. It wasn't some preordained or predestined thing, and then it was okay to not have 100% of your needs over the course of our relationship lifetime met by just one other person. And that gave us a lot of freedom.
Yes, Esther Perel talks about this a lot, and she talks about it for monogamous couples, right? Not even about non-monogamy, but as a really important and freeing, quite liberating realization that every couple needs to come to terms with, which is there is no the one. That is a myth. That is a monogamous myth, handed or a cultural myth. And once you can accept that there's no the one, there's just a person you choose, and from there choose to co-create with. It's actually quite liberating, because then if this person has flaws, if they're imperfect, it's like, okay, because they're not the one. You're just choosing each other. And then she also talks about that we were not made to meet all of the needs of one person. That was never what we were evolved to be. And that has kind of come into play as this like myth that comes with the one, but it's just not realistic.
Well, and I love that part that she talks about. It's like we grew up in communities like 40, 50 years ago where, you lived near your aunts and your uncles and you had multi-generations in one home and you had so much help and support and, different people in your lives that met different needs. And we, at some point in time, evolved to a point where the narrative has become that your one person, perfect person will meet every single one of your needs. Otherwise, it's somehow a failure. And that might be the third. Yeah. Otherwise, it's somehow a failure. That might be the third thing I'd want to debunk is that people look at an open relationship as a failure.
Right. So if you want an open relationship or are participating in one, that means that your original relationship or the primary relationship, that there's something wrong with it, that it has failed. Yeah, that's a good point. And I think one interesting output of non-monogamy and polyamory that I am seeing more and more today, and that has resonated true with me, that's related to this concept of community, which you just spoke of, right? So America used to be much more community-oriented, and we have moved towards a society that's much more nuclear family-based, and we no longer have the social networks we used to have in community networks. For me, polyamory has been a way to add back in that community and social support system, because I have another partner, my partner has another partner that helps with the family, that helps with our children, that is integrated into us. And so it's almost like making up for some of that lack that America has collectively, the situation we've collectively ended up in. Is that something you've heard, Danielle, from like just talking to other people that are non-monogamous and polyamory? Like, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the concept of chosen family is a huge part of of so many people's polyamorous journeys. Also seeing in this upcoming generation, people thinking of their gender as very fluid, thinking as their sexuality as something to be explored and experimented with, And I think the next iteration of that we're seeing as more and more people are exploring relationship anarchy and polyamory is that they have those same expectations for their relationships, that it is something that is constantly moving and adapting. And I think that's really exciting for me. I think
Yeah.
that our relationships 10 years from now are just going to look so incredibly unique to the individuals that are in them.
I was having this conversation with a friend the other day who is monogamous in a monogamous marriage, and she very vulnerably shared with me that because we were talking about sex and non-monogamy, all this stuff, and that when she got married, at that point kind of onwards, and for the past, 10 years, she doesn't feel like she has explored herself sexually at all since then. And she's having good sex. She's like, I have sex regularly. Like, it's still pretty good. But as an avenue for exploration of my own sexuality, of the sex that I have, the sex, the eroticism in my life, she's like, that honestly, that kind of stopped. That exploration stopped. And she's like, maybe I'm exploring in other ways. I went to grad school. I'm exploring intellectually. Like, there's other ways that I'm growing, but growth in that arena has stagnated. And I think that doesn't have to be the case at all for monogamous couples.
Any
100%.
relationship, yeah.
No way. It does not have to be the case. But one thing, to your point, Danielle, that I think non-monogamous and polyamorous people are saying, and they're putting a stake in the ground, they're saying, well, I don't want to stop growth in that arena. It's important to me to keep growing and exploring. Hey there. Quick break to tell you about something I'm really proud of. Bothered Stories is a home for short, spicy fiction from best-selling authors. Every story is bingeable, 20 to 35 minutes long, no cringe, no filler, just beautifully written, smutty stories for your lunch break, your commute, or the end of a long day. Members get a new story every week, access to the full searchable library, and a newsletter from me, the CEO, every first and third Sunday. And every author on our platform is paid. Your membership invests in writers doing meaningful work and helps destigmatize sex and pleasure. New members get a 2-week free trial, and an annual membership works out to just $5 a month. Head to botheredstories.com, use code SMUTTALKS, SMUTTALKS, for 25% off your annual membership. That's botheredstories.com, code SMUTTALKS. Okay, back to the show.
Absolutely. And not just growth from a sexual perspective. I mean, once you're with a partner for a really long period of time, you get into ruts, you get into routines. There is a deep trust and security and safety that comes in a long-term relationship. And Esther Perel talks about this better than anyone, which is then once it's really hard to have mystery and desire and excitement and newness when you're with a partner that you know deeply intimately. And it's not impossible, but it sort of takes some creativity. And I think like what's been one of the things that I really love about our open relationship is that I do get to explore these other aspects of myself in a way where I am completely removed from my role as wife, oftentimes completely removed from my role as mother, and also just removed from the history that I've shared with my partner for 16 years. I kind of get a little bit of a blank slate when I go on a date. And that's really exciting. But then I also get introduced to new ways of living, new perspectives. I love going on a date with someone who thinks differently than I do, that I wouldn't be exposed to otherwise. And yes, from a sexual exploration perspective, there's nothing like butterflies in your stomach and excitement to get everything a little spicy.
Oh my God, totally. It can be really healing too, to go out with somebody and be seen in that way, in a spicy, sexual, new, novel way, especially as a new mom. I was listening to a podcast about this the other day where the woman had a 6-month-old baby. She was in a non-monogamous marriage, and she hadn't been with anybody else in quite a while, like a couple of years maybe, because they just hadn't been dating, but at 6 months old, when her baby was 6 months old, she went on a date with somebody. And her husband at the time was so supportive of this for her as a new mom. He knew like how much it would mean to her to like get out and not be a mom and not be seen as a mom, be seen to this person as just a hot lady.
Yeah.
And so it was so they went on the podcast together, her and her husband, and talked about it. And it was so funny because they lived in Brooklyn and she went on a date to a bar, but her husband wanted to enable it so that if they hit it off at the bar and she wanted to go back home with him, she could. But they lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, her and her husband. So her husband took the baby, wore him in a baby carrier, like strapped the baby to his chest, went for a walk in the park, Prospect Park, Brooklyn, which I lived in Brooklyn for a decade. So I know Prospect Park intimately. So I can like imagine this. There's a 5K loop around the park, 3-mile loop. He just walked that loop with the baby for like hours. So that
Oh my
I
goodness.
know, like talk about supportive partner. So that she could go back, and she did. She did want to go back home with him after the bar, and she had this like fabulous, sexy experience while her husband walked the baby. And by the way, like babies love being walked, so like the baby
Yeah.
was great.
The
Yeah,
baby was fine.
baby was great. She and the woman, when she talked about this on the podcast, she almost started crying because it was actually so healing and meaningful to her postpartum in that particular moment of her life to get to go out and do that and feel that way.
Yeah, I imagine she was so deeply grateful for her husband. That's how I feel when I get to go on dates or even when I just go on trips and travel with some of my friends.
Yeah.
I'm just so deeply grateful for my husband. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because that's one of the reasons why, or use cases in which we're most attracted to our partner, is when they come alive. Like when
Mhm.
they're full of energy,
Absolutely.
they are full of joy, they're buzzing, whatever it is, whether it's from a work related situation or something else. But when you see them come alive, that's when you're most attracted to them. So kind of ironically, you wouldn't expect it, but sometimes non-monogamy actually enables that for your partner. And then that just bleeds into your relationship with them.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this overlap between smut and non-monogamy, which we like hinted about in the beginning. I think it's really interesting. And before we do that, I think what would be helpful to hear from you, Danielle, is a little bit about monogamy and the patriarchy and how those two intersect, where the overlap is. I suspect that once we get into that a little bit, smut and non-monogamy, we might like find some connections from there because there are already neurons in my brain firing about this. But let's start with monogamy and the patriarchy. Tell me a little bit more about how you see the history of kind of monogamy in the context of the patriarchy, and just like where does your brain take this question?
Yeah. So where my brain goes is that about 5 to 7,000 years ago, at the advent of agriculture, when people started settling down and having crops and property for the first time, inheritance mattered. And when inheritance mattered, paternity mattered. And so for the first time, who the man's child was really important. Women, we've already always known who our kids are. We popped them out. Men, that was a little bit different. But with the advent of agriculture, all of a sudden, with property also came property owners and then kings and emperors. And interestingly, when we look at these big historical things that have happened, so 5 to 7,000 years ago, with the advent of agriculture, the other thing that happened, there was a massive Y chromosome collapse. And this is one of the reasons that we know this to be true. So the Y chromosome collapse, at that point in time, for those 2,000 years, for every man that was passing on his genetic DNA, there were 17 women passing
Wow.
on their DNA. So
And why,
today,
what was that a result of the wars, or why was that the case?
two things. One was so warring clans would actually try
Yeah.
and take out entire paternal lines.
Yeah.
But the second thing and the main thing was the men with power and the men with the most property had multiple wives. I mean,
Mm.
King Solomon had 600 wives, I think it was, and 300 concubines. All of your Chinese emperors had massive harems. Ottoman Empire. I mean, Charlemagne himself was like the biggest proponent of monogamy in the Catholic Church, and he had 5 wives, maybe 7. I forget exactly. So I think one of the things that's super interesting is that we have seen historically over and over and over again that when men have power and assets and resources, they really care about paternity, they have multiple wives in order to do so. And so, and that has been the case for going back 5,000 years. And interestingly, I found a stat that we didn't see our first monogamous monarch until 500 years ago. So not to go on a tangent, but all of our code of laws, like back from the Code of Hammurabi that turned in the Mosaic Code, the Mosaic Law turning into a Greco-Roman law, turning to English common law. I mean, all of those laws go back to a handful of really key things that were decided in the Code of Hammurabi, which was written underneath polygamous emperors. I'm sorry to go off on this tangent, but that original code wrote that a woman was a man's property.
Yeah.
That the reason that rape was illegal is because it was considered to be theft of either a father's daughter or a husband's wife. And that's how rape was punished, as theft. But essentially it wrote into the code of law that a woman was a man's property, and that has been passed down for 4,000 years. I mean, and that I think is one of the things that just has blown my mind, is how deeply ingrained this concept of, and I don't even want to call it the patriarchy, because I think it's
Yeah.
so old, it goes back so far, that I feel like it needs a different term. Our legal codes for the past 4,000 years have had this assumption that women were a man's property, and that didn't change until covert. Like, I could go off into like a whole tangent around monogamy in the Catholic Church here in a second. And I'm so sorry, Allison. I'm not sure this is where you want me to go on this one, but it's
I think this is fascinating. I mean, I think it's fascinating. And yes, and women as property of men is the core root of what I'm calling the patriarchy. And you're providing even additional historical context to it, right? And like, that's really interesting. So yes, continue. Let's continue down this thread a little bit more.
Well, I think like when it comes to, monogamy was pushed by the church from the 16th until the 6th century. That's when they came in and were really pushing hard for monogamous marriages for multiple reasons. One being financial, the other one being power oriented, and the other one being doctrine. Like they genuinely the church believes that God determined that a man and a woman would be one flesh. Like that's the thing that's quoted from Genesis. But I think that when I think of I actually don't think that it's monogamy that's been dictated by the patriarchy. I think it is different. I think it is woman as a man's property that's been dictated by the patriarchy. And we haven't had big changes. The first big change came about 170 years ago, when a woman was first allowed to actually keep her own property, keep her own inheritance, earn a wage, and be able to keep it rather than it go to her husband. That was 178 years ago in the US, and I think a little more recently in the UK. And then a woman couldn't get a credit card underneath her own name until about 60 years ago. And not credit card as in to go shopping, credit as in able to get a mortgage and have a house underneath her own name, get a car for transportation and freedom, get a phone in order to be able to communicate. And it was
so very recently.
Very recent.
So that was in the 1970s, I think, that law changed, that women could get a credit card or get credit.
Exactly. And so I think that, like, yes, I think that the deeply inherited monogamy comes from, I don't say it's monogamy. I think this idea that women are controlled and property of men has been so deeply ingrained, and it hasn't been until the last 50 years that our laws have been restructured and reworked to enable women to choose something other than a relationship with a man. And so that to me is like, I think why so many women in particular are excited about these alternative relationships that are coming out. Not even necessarily no matter what they look like, whether that is, a lesbian marriage, whether that's being bisexual, but whether it's living alone or having some sort of alternative relationship. We haven't had that option available to us as a gender until the last 50 years.
Yeah.
And so now a whole bunch of women, because they're earning their own wage and because they're independent, are like, wow, I've got some options. This isn't.
Yes. There's a lot there. Thank you so much for all of that. And one book that's coming to mind, just if anybody's interested in reading a little bit more about this, the book Sex at Dawn talks about societies in the pre-agricultural era, so before this agricultural revolution that you spoke of, Danielle, and it debunks this notion that humans were always meant to mate in a monogamous pairing for their whole life. It debunks that because it shows you so many examples from around the world of hunter-gatherer societies that were not monogamous practicing societies, which I didn't know. I just kind of had absorbed this belief, I guess, that like humans as a species, like this is what they do. And that's just actually not true.
The flip side of that argument, and it's true because biologically, like when you look at some of the things we've inherited from our primate ancestors, biologically, we lean in the direction of non-monogamous. On the flip side of it, 5% of all animals in the animal kingdom are pair bonded, and humans are very clearly pair bonded. And so, like, there's so many really interesting perspectives to this to answer the question, like, what are we as humans naturally? But going back to the writing of it, that really hasn't that I think informs so much of relationships in so many different ways. We had talked about how I feel like I grew up reading the Bible, and the Bible preached this idea of one man, one woman is one flesh, and that's a union. I grew up reading fairy tales of discovering my Prince Charming. And I think what's been wild to me recently is all of my favorite fantasy novels. And I think in every single one of them, the Fae King sees his like human mate from across the room and immediately feels a mating bond. And I love that in my literature. And I don't know why, but like, despite all of my knowledge of that I just walked you through, God, it still makes a good story. And I don't know why. Why? Like, what do
I make of that?
Yeah.
Well, yes. So I can tell you some story. If you want to talk about writing, I can tell you some story elements that, if you're a human, it like deeply resonates with you. And number one is the idea of being chosen. And if that's chosen, that could be chosen by a romantic partner, but there's other ways that we could write about being chosen. But that experience of being chosen, being wanted, and being belonging is such a core human need that when we see it written in almost a hyperbolic way, it's like we're drawn to it. And it is fantasy, and we read it as fantasy, but yet the piece that it
the
speaks
core need
to,
is there.
The
core desire
is there. Exactly. And so you do see that in especially a lot of fantasy related romantasy, as we call it. You will see that like there's this like not just core attraction, but almost like fated mates is what they call that in the literature, for sure. But the other thing you mentioned, Danielle, that I want to double click on or underscore, because I think it's really important, is along this conversation of women now having more options. And that includes like relationship types. So like lesbian pairings, maybe non-monogamy, but just maybe choosing to be alone, you mentioned. I think that's really, really important because one of the myths that we want to debunk when we were talking about earlier that we might have missed, which I think I've been thinking about more and more, is this myth that a romantic pairing is the be-all, end-all, the thing you most want to achieve and is better than all other relationships. Like we prioritize that above all other relationships. And what we're seeing more and more, which I think is so encouraging, is I'm seeing people choosing to be co-parents that aren't necessarily romantic partners. Yep. You're seeing group. I have a friend who is has 3 people that they're co-parenting a child with by choice. You're seeing like friends decide they want to live together and commit to a long-term, living arrangement in really deep and meaningful ways. And so there's almost like part of this conversation isn't just like, oh, we can be monogamous and have lots of romantic pairings. Part of it is like, oh, we can choose to deprioritize romantic pairings in light of other equally meaningful, important relationships.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, I love that. So let's get back to the smut and the patriarchy. I think like one thing that I prior to this conversation, challenged myself to think about like, well, what is the overlap? And one of the things that came to mind for me was the embodied experience I have, the feeling in my body I get when I tell someone that may not know that I'm non-monogamous, which we've already talked about. That feeling is the exact same feeling I get in my body when I tell someone that I founded and am the CEO of a smut publishing company. It's the same. I'm like,
I get it.
this is the point.
Yeah.
They're either going to be like, I shouldn't let my kids play with her kids anymore, or they're going to be like, oh, that's cool, whatever. And like, what is that? That's the feeling of shame, right? It's like there is that's like the moral weight of like, these
Societal
things.
expectations and like,
yes.
yeah. I get it too. I'm a content creator that talks about non-monogamy. Like I used to do marketing for big name brands. And I have that same feeling of, on the one hand, a little bit of shame and embarrassment when I'm talking to like I went out with my like old manager recently. I struggle to talk about this to my like extended family and parents are very embarrassed by this. But at the same time, I'm so proud of what I built, and I am so excited to see what you are going to build with Bothered Stories.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I feel that too. I feel like excited and proud, and also yet at the same time have that moment of like bracing. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe someday I won't, but that's where I am. And so I think both, just to like tie that up, I think both reading smut, loving smut, has historically been a shameful thing for women. And I think, wanting to have sex with multiple people or wanting to be in multiple relationships, wanting to not just have the one be the one, carries some sort of moral weight, some sort of shame to it as well. So there's an overlap.
I always used to think that for me personally, like reading smut, reading like really sexual, like reading these sexual scenes in some of my favorite books. I mean, I love the escapism that this is going to sound terrible, but like if you're in a monogamous relationship, I think it's the safest way you could cheat because there's no way that reading a book should count as cheating. But when you're in a book, you're so in it, you're in love with these characters, you are living in a new place in those moments, and you get to live vicariously through these experiences. And I mean, it's such a turn on. Like, I love that I can just jump it. Like I'm on my audiobooks. I have my saved clips, like my favorite ones that turn me on where I like adore the characters and God bless like AI fan art nowadays. I was watching like an entire video of like the Nessa Cassian scene from one of the Court of Thorn and Roses books. And I was like, I love that has become just so accessible and such a fun, easy way to get turned on. And I always thought this about smut just in general, like what an amazing way to leave your body and escape for a second and just be totally turned on. It's so fun.
Well, I think you just hit on another overlap or point of connection between smut and alternative lifestyles or non-monogamy, which is smut is an avenue for women to explore their own sexuality. And there have, there are studies about this. There was a recent survey that came out about this. Women have spoken to this. Like there's memes on the internet of a woman reading a book and being like, I just discovered a new kink. like I just discovered what I'm into or what I might be curious about from reading. It's helping me explore myself. And
how many women were excited about BDSM after reading 50 Shades of Grey? Right. It wasn't for the writing quality,
That is the highest. That is the romance book with the highest sales of all time, by the way.
Does not surprise me.
I know. But yes, I think non-monogamy, as we noted earlier, has like played that role for people as well. It has allowed them to keep exploring in that arena. So I think that's like an interesting overlap between smut, between alternative relationship styles.
I think that's done enough. I think the accessibility of smut And I'm specifically thinking of the audiobooks. Like I know that people have bought romance novels, the like what is it, the like $1 bin romance novels. Like I still remember those as a teenager
The
growing up.
Harlequin novels.
Yes, the
Yep.
Harlequin novels.
Yep.
God, what's that guy with the long hair? You see him on every book cover.
Fabio.
Yes, I do think that there has always been a woman who was comfortable buying that book and reading it in public, right? And one of the things that has happened with the Kindles, with the audiobooks, is I think that the smut and this access to something that's for pure pleasure has just become really accessible. And I love this for women because, like, to be able to to be able to have this like what feels like very safe and private avenue to explore things outside of their realm, outside of their regular comfort zone. And I love that smut has made desire much more accessible and the idea of exploring new things more accessible. And explain, like I remember talking to a friend of mine who's like, I finally figured out how my vibrator worked because of because of a smut, like because of one of the smut novels. I'm like, what on earth were you doing before? That's what I want. But okay, I'm so happy to hear this.
Vibrators are not that complicated, but I'm glad she figured it out. Okay, if you could have a smut story written for you or for the world, but like you could like commission it, and Bothered Stories is going to publish it. What would you want it to contain? Like what? What elements? What should it have?
Do you know what's interesting? I am writing a memoir at the moment, and I made a very conscious decision to not have any explicit sex scenes in the book. Mm-hmm. And there's definitely things that are spicy and really fun, but there's no explicit sex scenes. And that was primarily because I think it is more important to tell the relationship story about an open relationship without sex, because I am very passionate about debunking this idea of open relationships just being about sex. And there are a lot of ways to write something that's spicy but non-sexual. So it's like, what I call it, I said it was sensual without being explicit. And so I've put so much strategic thought into that recently. It's really hard for me to just be like, okay, let's say like I'm going a totally different direction.
We need to get a ghostwriter in to capture all the stuff that didn't make it into the memoir. Like,
oh no, I'm writing it. All right.
Yeah.
No way. I love writing this kind of thing. I had a really fun book too. I had a really fun date once writing like what was it? What do they call it? There's a word for it. We send each other like really fun.
Where you both write back and forth, like what happens in the scene?
Yeah, like not about us, but like a story. So collaborative erotica. Yeah. So that was
yeah.
What would mine be about? I think that it's interesting. I would probably I think about it such a strategic perspective. Like I'd want to debunk things around thruples or like female male threesomes. What would I want to do?
Well, I figured you'd want it to have multiple people in it or some sort of non-monogamy in some way.
I definitely would. And I think it would also want to be something that I had experienced personally. So that would need to be an aspect of it. I would probably write a story about someone who has a genuine fear and is something has happened to her. I think I would probably write from a female's perspective. So something has happened to her that completely changed her life, that kind of upended a few things. And then she is in a situation where she can either decide to go the old trusted route or she can push herself outside of her comfort zone. And when she pushes herself outside of her comfort zone, that includes, almost like, I think I would give, you know what I think I would do? I would have this idea of a woman, this is totally just spitballing, but she almost like gives herself, like she's probably like a bit type A, and then she gives herself these things that she would never be comfortable doing on like a checklist, and now she has to go do them. And so in my mind, she's definitely like a 40-something-year-old woman, and she's going to go have like sex with like a 20-year-old at some point in time. She's going to go walk into a sex store and with like a 300-pound budget and buy something insane or buy something that the store owner just tells her to.
She's gonna have a threesome. Can we give her a threesome too? Okay.
We'll definitely give her a threesome. But I sort of love this idea because I'm such a, I'm a very organized, methodical person. And so I love this idea of someone who also is like that, who like wants checklists and organizations and, to give it scores. Oh, she would totally be scoring it afterwards. It'd be like, that was an
She's gonna have a spreadsheet.
Yeah. Oh, she will 100% have a spreadsheet color coded. Like,
I love this. Okay, this is amazing. Okay, well, we do have to wrap us up. Thank you, Danielle. That's amazing. I'll make sure it gets written. We'll add it to the list at Bothered Stories. We'll come back to you
when you're ready for Bothered Stories on that one, I am so writing that story for you.
Okay, believe me. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. This has been such a joy.
It has been a joy. And before we and tell us where listeners can find you. And you also mentioned that you have a memoir coming up. I don't know if there's anything more you want to say about that, but also congratulations. That sounds amazing.
Thank you. So you can find me on social media at Openly Committed across all my channels. Openlycommitted.com is my website, where you can find a lot of my most popular stories, where I have one-on-one calls with people. It's also where my E&M matchmaking is. E&M matchmaking is currently just live in the Boston area because I am figuring it out. I am just starting to make my first couple of connections and send people out on dates. And it has been an amazing whirlwind of an experience. And so I'm trying to figure out how to launch that in one area before I scale further. And I have a agent and I am finishing the manuscript. It's in final stages of edits. That's what I'm going to be editing. I got everything back from my developmental editor. I'm going to be editing it like a crazy person for the next 2 to 3 weeks and sending it over to my agent to shop around to publishers. And so hopefully next time we chat, we'll see what happens.
Okay, well, good luck with that.
Thank you. The book has been a journey. This will be my third round to publisher. So I wasn't able to shop on proposal. But I did have some interest, not to buy off of proposal, but to read the manuscript once it was written. So writing a book has been, speaking of things outside outside of someone's comfort zone, it's been a huge process and journey for me personally.
It is. I mean, I talk to authors all the time, and it's a beast, the publishing world. It's not easy. And I commend anyone out there doing it. And I also know just the actual act of writing a book is quite challenging. And it pulls a lot on your own heartstrings, and it requires a lot of work. So I'm excited to read that. Congratulations, Danielle. And thank you so much for coming on.
This is so much fun. All right. Well, I can't wait to read my first. Oh, I need to read to write a bothered story.
We'll circle back on that. All right. Thank you, Danielle.
Have a good one.
Thank you for listening to Bothered Stories Smut Talks. Make sure to follow or subscribe so you can keep tuning in as we drop new episodes. And if you liked this, go to botheredstories.com and sign up. We've got beautifully written, hot as hell stories waiting just for you. Thanks for getting bothered with us.